Welcome into a new edition of Going to Buffalo on the Built in Buffalo Podcast Network. Host Kevin Kevin Siracuse. It's the dead of the offseason. We got some time to rank some certain individuals in certain position groups, but today we're talking about the head coaches. Where does Sean McDermott rank? We're going to do the top 15 head coaches in the NFL, and we'll kind of go from there in terms of who we think and why, and we'll see where Sean winds up. But as always, this show is brought to you by the Summit Center for some of the best autism care in Western New York.
And tonight's show is also brought to you by Dave Dengler and the Larson-Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson-Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com.
So, in order to bring you some great coverage all season long, we're going to have the training camp previews and what we expect in July here in a couple weeks. We're going to have some guests coming in. We're definitely going to have some different points of conversation over the next few weeks as we reach to count down to training camp. But today, one of the hottest topics, I think, last season, and then obviously, why not? It's going to continue on into this year is, where do these head coaches rank? Are we really, one of the hottest topics last year was Sean McDermott, head coaches. Is Andy Reid always going to outcoach McDermott? This guy's a better coach. That guy's a better coach. Where does this all come together at the end of all this? And we're going to do our best to put our top 15 together and then put it up against McDermott and then maybe have a discussion on our expectations around Sean McDermott at the end. But Kevin, we're going to start it off with you. Tell us about your thinking. What do you got going on with head coach rankings? Just kind of tell us your overarching vision of your ranking list.
Well, first of all, my thinking is it's very hot out. I thought when you were going to say, what's your thinking? I was going to say, well, it's very steamy, and I'm glad that we're finally inside here because it was sweltering the last couple of days. So I would assume where you are, it's just as hot as where I am, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's 90.
Yeah, it's brutal. To Joey's question, how am I doing? That's how I'm doing. I'm very hot, but I'm relieved to be. We have central air, so I'm in the man cave now. Mowing lawns was brutal today and yesterday, for that matter. So that's the first part of the question. Now, the second part of the question: what am I thinking about for these head coaches? I really like this topic because there's not a lot to talk about during the offseason. And we don't want to just be redundant and talk about the same. So, like, how many targets is Keon Coleman going to get? We're going to do that enough in late July and August and into September. So we wanted to take some time and try to rank these head coaches. And I'm happy that we're starting with the head coaches because Sean McDermott is a very polarizing figure when it comes to rankings. I think people like McDermott in general. Like, everyone agrees that he's a great guy. Maybe not Tyler Dunn, but we'll talk about that once we get into the rankings. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see not only where you and I put McDermott, but where some of the fans would put McDermott. Because I'll admit, I had him outside of the top 10 last year because I did these rankings. And I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I was a little bit too harsh on him. And I know some people think that he should be all the way up towards the top. So I'm glad we're doing this because this is a perfect time of the year to do it.
It's definitely caused some tension among Bills fans between the Ty Dunn article. You got some fans that love McDermott, some that hate him, some that are in the middle. And there's definitely, some big discourse around should the team move on from him? Can they improve from him? That's been another course of action that people have wanted to discuss. Like, are you taking a risk to downgrade your roster elsewhere, maybe make better crunch time decisions? If that's one of your biggest gripes, maybe make in-game adjustments. Like, if you're really that into challenges, there may be some things that you think the Bills can improve on. But coaching and developing of your defense may also be lacking. So can you really upgrade the Bills offense enough to discount the fact of whatever regression you're going to have on the defense? That's been one of the biggest points of discussion around, do the Bills need to make a coaching move? And until they really fall flat, I just don't see anything along those lines. So we're gonna dive in today to kind of see, what do these coaches look like? Like, let's talk about coaches that are actually ranked between 10 and 15. Where does McDermott stack up against these guys who don't win playoff games, at least anymore for some of these purposes? and then kind of we'll go from there, because the Bills could find themselves in that range, 15th to 20th head coach. Look at Robert Saleh. He could have whatever roster he wants, Kevin. I don't think he's making our top 15. I don't have Robert Saleh in my top 15. But he's just in a perfect example of somebody that's like what are we doing here? So, we're going to start there. So good point of the Bills division, Robert Saleh. I think you nod your head no to him being in your top 15, and he just never accomplished anything. So I'm going to leave him off of my list. And basically, do you have any AFC East coaches in your top 15?
Yeah, I think Mike McDaniel could make a strong case. But before we get into that, I think we should note there are 8 new head coaches this year going into the 2024 season.
Yes.
So, that automatically starts at 24, right? Because
Correct.
I'm not just going to put Dave Canales at 21 and say he's immediately better than Saleh.
Or Raheem Morris. Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. So, if we were doing this in totality, it probably would start at 24 anyways. And then you have the group of, like you said, Robert Saleh, who's probably around that 20 range, because he's not my top 15. And just to finish off the Saleh point, I think this is a make or break year for him, because if they fumble the bag here and Rodgers just turns out to be a mental case, or he gets injured again, and they're dealing with the Zach Wilson type of quarterbacks drama. They have Tyrod, so I think it'll be better. But if they don't make the playoffs, Robert Saleh is probably done, and maybe even Joe Douglas.
Yeah. And then obviously you have another new coach within the division, the first time ever that we're going to see first time in most of our adult lives not seeing any Bill Belichick there. So we're going to get a Gerard Mayo-led team to the point where you had prospects, one notable Jaheim Bell, the 7th-round tight end that the Patriots drafted, mentioning not even knowing that Bill Belichick was gone when Gerard Mayo approached him after the draft. So I thought that was pretty funny. But as we're going to leave out, I don't think, there is a play that can be made to be discussing, Jim Harbaugh. Definitely we could talk about him here. What are your thoughts with bringing up someone like Jim Harbaugh who's done it before?
Yeah, I guess he has a little bit more leeway since he's done it before. He has the experience. Yeah. He's coming off that national championship with Michigan, but I can't do it. You got to prove yourself.
Okay.
Because we know the NFL. It's like any given Sunday, right? So sure, he could come in and be great, but you kind of have to earn your stripes here. So, that being said, let's just talk about the new hires. We'll get that out of the way right now. I know we're doing top 15, but just to make sure we're on the same page, because to be honest, I kind of forgot about these too. So these are in alphabetical order. Brian Callahan is with the Titans. Dave Canales is with the Panthers. Jim Harbaugh, the aforementioned Jim Harbaugh, is with the Chargers. And his career record is 44-19-1, just for those wondering. Yep. Mike McDonald with the Seahawks, Gerard Mayo with the Patriots, Raheem Morris with the Falcons, and then Antonio Pierce. They removed the interim tag from him. He's with the Raiders, and then Dan Quinn with the Commanders. So a lot of new head coaches this year. And like I said, if we were doing this in totality, that's probably your bottom 8 right there. I'm not just going to insert, Gerard Mayo and say, well, I think he can be the 22nd best head coach. No, you got to prove it first.
Yeah, and obviously Jim Harbaugh is probably the only one on this list that had a chance to crack this anyways. That's why we did top 15. We got Brian Callahan's never coached. Canales has never coached, head coached. Mike McDonald, the Seahawks version, is not have ever coached. Mayo's never head coached. Obviously we have a losing record by Raheem Morris, very much so. Antonio Pierce 5-4. Dan Quinn's a 500 coach. And none of them would really have cracked it anyway. So I think that the only discussion would have been around what can Harbaugh do, but we're going to have to see it in the Chargers. And maybe next year when we have this conversation, he'll very much so be in the top 15, or maybe he'll be a has-been. So that will be a point of next year. But some of the other coaches that I think are at the bottom of our list that we can kind of get out of the way: Dennis Allen, Jonathan Gannon, Matt Eberflus from the Bears. You got Robert Saleh that we've talked about pretty extensively. Brian Daboll, where does he rank? I don't think he's going to make either of our top 15. Shane Steichen did not have a great first season, but Anthony Richardson did go out. Todd Bowles, a guy that always hovers around the 500 or less mark. D'Amico Ryans and Doug Peterson. Those are kind of the borderline guys that are right there. And that's what leads me to my 15th guy. that I have on my list. It's Mike McCarthy, Kevin. That's where I was thinking he would be somebody that has done it in the past. He's been fairly successful, now hovering or just right around kind of flirting around with, always firing his offensive coordinator. What did he do with Kellen Moore? Like, there's just always that disdain around like his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, and always movement happening. What do you think about Mike locking in Mike McCarthy at the 15 spot?
I like your thinking, because I was thinking the same exact thing with McCarthy. Okay. Now, here's a spot where I was wondering if you would put someone like a DeMeco Ryans here, because now this is the interesting point. We should probably lay the groundwork here. Are we going based on what we know going into 2024,
yes,
or are we taking some of their past experiences and say, well, McCarthy does have a Super Bowl and DeMeco Ryans was a player when that happened? Ryans does not have the experience. So, I mean, are we taking any of the experience into factor? Like, I feel like we have to take some of their accolades into. We are.
I say we should take some of their accolades, but in terms of ranking, it's for now. Like, we're not doing like forever lists. I think we're going to take a little bit of it as we're doing tiebreakers, and like, there's definitely some discussions that can be had around some of the things they've accomplished, but I need it in the last 10 years. Or I'm not going to overly consider it. And more recently than that, and potentially with their current teams. I think that's more what it's about, is have we seen success with this regime, with this team, with this quarterback, with this defensive coordinator? I think that's really what's important as we're coming up with these rankings. And that's why I just think Mike McCarthy is literally, to me, just the middle of the pack, 15th coach. Is decent, will do some things nice on offense, can get the most out of his team. What's he doing with, call it Dak Prescott? I think there's definitely some merit there, but that's about where I have him. It doesn't look like he's going to turn into an Andy Reid style of continued growth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, does that mean that DeMeco Ryans is probably in that 16 to 17 range just because he's so inexperienced and we need to see more?
Yeah, I have him right out. I thought he was carried a little bit by his rookie quarterback, and this is the year that will get him ranked to me. So if he's able to redo it with this roster that he has, if he doesn't do it with this roster, he's tumbling to me. But if he is able to do it, I think that's where you can really make a case, maybe even a catapult into the top 10, top 12 right after his second year. So I think he'll be a good name to mention next year. But yeah, I have him locked in at the 16 spot, and I have Doug Peterson at 17. That's where the two misses, like right below the making the list for me.
Okay, and that was going to be my next question. Does that mean that Doug Peterson is also on the outside looking in? Because
that's a horrible job he did last year, Kevin. Horrible job.
What was their record last year? I've heard people talking about the Jaguars, and I can't remember their record.
Last season they had that terrible collapse. They didn't even make the playoffs.
Yeah, that's right.
8-9, I believe.
Was it that bad?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I was thinking about putting Peterson right in this vicinity because of the Super Bowl and what he did with Jacksonville. This is going to be his third year, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So his first year, it looked like he resurrected the team and Trevor Lawrence after Urban Meyer just completely stomped them into the ground. But yeah, with that collapse, I could see him on the outside looking in. Now, does that mean that Sean Payton is getting the nod over Peterson? Do you have Payton ranked?
Yeah, I have Sean Payton ranked. Yep. Just slightly above, just due to accolades. I want to see what he's able to do here. But I have him next on the list. He's my next guy. I have him at 14.
I was thinking, so he would be 14 then.
Yes.
That's tough because Sean Payton seems like a basket case himself, and what he did with Russell Wilson and the Broncos are a dumpster fire as well. So, I feel like this could be a toss-up here. Really, let's just say DeMeco Ryans is 17, and then 14, 15, 16. I feel like that could be a toss-up between Sean Payton, Mike McCarthy, and Doug Peterson.
Yeah, that's about where I have them. I have Peterson on the outs. I can't see the job he did last year in ranking him in a top 15 coach. They were poor. The team did not rally. They didn't get the most out of Trevor Lawrence. Injuries galore. They always have good receivers there, good skill players. I can't put him I can't put Peterson with a good conscience in my top 15 right now. I got him right outside of it. I got him below Ryans right now for me.
Okay, yeah. Now the other name is Kevin O'Connell.
Mm-hmm.
Does he rank for you?
Yeah, I have Kevin O'Connell ranked. Yep.
Okay, because trying to figure out the order here. Now, just so you guys know, Kevin and I have not discussed this one bit. So, like, we are doing this raw off the top of our heads, and we're trying to make this list, put it with, combine our ideas with your ideas because we might need a tiebreaker here. So, I have no idea what Kevin's thinking. He has no idea what I'm thinking. We both have some rough ideas in our heads, but we're going to put one list together here. And that being said, I was thinking about O'Connell. What have you done for me lately? I think that Minnesota is interesting. They extended Justin Jefferson. That's huge. I think JJ McCarthy is going to be also interesting. But it seems like the Vikings are just always good. It seems like they always have like that type of team. I'm thinking like even when Cousins went out last year, they were taking who were their quarterbacks that they were throwing back there, and they were still winning. Like that one
Jaron
rookie,
Hall.
yeah, Jaron Hall, and he looked pretty decent against the Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, look, now they're going to roll Sam Darnold, JJ McCarthy. So it's going to be an interesting duo that they have there. I think it would go to McCarthy, but Sam Darnold could have a rebirth. So they have some talent there. It's going to be an interesting. I don't think their division's overly. I know some people are on the Packers right now. I just don't think that division's overly good. A lot of people, some people like the Bears. The Vikings could still make that come up. So I have him right there. I thought he has been a successful coach, especially with a healthy Kirk Cousins. Got a lot out of him. The team was an offensive juggernaut with him. They've had some defensive lapses. I'm comfortable putting him right in this range of who we're talking about here for sure. I think he's done more to me than some of those has-beens, in my opinion. So I'm kind of locking him in. The bigger discussion is who do you put, like someone like Sean Payton, who's been successful, seemed to get a lot out of his team at points last year, but then just had that disaster with Russell Wilson. So, I could go either way with if you put, him above Sean Payton or not.
So McCarthy's locked in at 15 because technically, if we're saying like, what have you done for me lately? Like at least McCarthy got his team to the playoffs and then they folded. Peyton didn't, right. But this is kind of like that turnaround reset year for them. So, would you think
I'm fine with Peyton being 15,
McCarthy 14, O'Connell
14,
13?
O'Connell 13. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay, so that means I know we're not doing the top 17, but just for clarity purposes. So we have Doug Peterson at 16, right on the outside looking in, and then we would have
I have Ryans at 16 because he outcoached him last year. So I have Ryans at 16, Peterson at 17. That would be how my top 17.
I'm thinking just because of the experience factor, but I guess it doesn't matter because we're just doing the top 15 anyway.
Sure, either way, yeah.
Okay, so that means, do you want to put Peyton at 15, McCarthy 14, and then O'Connell 13?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I like that.
Okay, I think that O'Connell has a higher ceiling than Peyton and McCarthy do as of right now. So yeah, I would be fine putting him at number 13.
Okay. Yep, I think that's fair enough. Now as we kind of enter into the next tier, I think we're now into where we're saying, Mike McDaniel. He's kind of what I have there, Mike McDaniel versus Nick Sirianni. That's kind of what I was thinking in my head for this next tier of player coach, and then like maybe Kevin Stefanski. So that's kind of what I'm thinking for the next three.
Me and you are right on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have Mike McDaniel at 12, and then Sirianni at 11 because Sirianni got his team to the Super Bowl. McDaniel can't win in the playoffs. So that right there kind of cements McDaniel at 12 for me. And then Sirianni, last year when I did this, I think I had Sirianni number 2, and that was like a lot of recency bias. And I think it was pretty telling how Philly collapsed at the end of this past season. And he got rid of both of his coordinators, brought in Vic Fangio, and who's the OC now?
In Philly?
Yeah. Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator, and
they brought in Kellen Moore.
Yes, Kellen Moore.
Yep.
So, we'll see. But I think how that season ended and how many people were saying that the Eagles should fire Sirianni. Now, I know that Philadelphia is a very gruff sports town, so it doesn't take much to get them riled up and say fire whoever. But based on how last season ended, I don't think that he should be a top 10 coach as of right now. So I have Sirianni right on the outside looking in at 11.
Okay, there you have it. I agree. Yeah, that's kind of where I've been sitting for me. I mean, I in theory, I could have Sirianni above Stefanski. Like he got absolutely, to me, steamrolled. I mean, ultimately, like I don't really think that there's much there for me. That who's better? Who do you have? You have Stefan. Why do you have Stefanski over Sirianni?
Okay, so are we saying that Stefanski's 10 then?
Yeah, he would be the next guy up. I don't think there's anybody that would be as low as him.
Okay, so I just think that he's a really good coach and he can maximize his talent considering what he did with Joe Flacco last year. And he's a what, 2-time coach of the year?
Yes.
So, I mean, I think that says a lot right there. And, talking about firings, I remember listening to the radio last summer and they were saying, like, this is make or break season for Stefanski. And I think he took the Browns to like some camp miles away a week or two even before, because was Cleveland in the Hall of Fame game last year?
I'm not sure. Not sure.
Well, I think Cleveland, regardless, had an early jump at training camp, and I think he tried bonding the team together. And considering everything that's happened with Deshaun Watson, I think that speaks volumes that Stefanski has been able to kind of, turn the ship around, and not only turn around, he steered them to the playoffs last year with Joe Flacco off the couch. Now, I know they fell apart in the playoffs, but I think it says a lot for Stefanski to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's to me, like I think some of the accolades of what Sirianni's able to do, I would put him above Stefanski, but it's really, Stefanski's still a 37-30 coach. So ultimately, like there's still a little bit of work to be done. I need to see more out of Watson. I don't think he's gotten anything out of him. It just doesn't seem like the team's been overly good outside of like a stretch last year. And certainly not in the playoffs when they got rolled. So he has all the makings to be like, is he like, how do you rank? Like, here's an interesting point. How do you rank him above McDaniel? They're like the same person in terms of success. So like McDaniel may have gotten more out of his unit though. So you know what I'm saying? Like to me, it's very similar to Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the factor of having that Joe Flacco aspect to it. And like you said, he's a 37-30 record, so 552 win percentage. He's been with the Browns since 2020. And like I said, he's been the AP coach of the year twice now. And I think that he can just maximize the talent that he has or lack thereof, and he gets the most out of his players. And again, I think that goes a long way. So if we have Stefanski at 10, just to kind of rewind here, Mike McDaniel Sirianni is 11, and we had McDaniel at 12 and O'Connell at 13. And I think it's kind of funny because McDaniel and O'Connell have both been coaching since 2022, and their records are 20-14. So I think we're kind of right on par there, putting them back to back.
Okay. Well, there you have it as we kind of round out, as we get into the top 10 now, and we kind of look at the next tier of coaches. As always, smash that like button. That's really important to us as we start continue to discuss head coaches here. And thank you to our show sponsors as well, Dave Dengler, as well as Summit Center. So we really appreciate that. But we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this, Kevin, the top 10. This is what everybody's here for. This is what everybody's here to hear. What we have to say now about these top head coaches as we still continue to work our way backwards. But I think there's a couple of coaches that would stick out to me. You got Dan Campbell, somebody that has been successful, but still has a losing record as a coach in this league, which is an interesting style to be in the top 10. But here we are. We then have, Zach Taylor. What do we think of his Bengals? It's losing record as well, 37-44-1. So losing record, but always does seem to get a lot out, has really good position coaches. So clearly can coach up his position in offensive and defensive coordinators. So those are a couple names to watch. Mike Tomlin, Matt LaFleur. Are we in Sean McDermott range? So here we are with the, starting backwards at 9. Who are you putting number 9?
I have Zach Taylor here.
Okay.
Because I think, like, to your point, he does have a losing record still. Now, I didn't realize he's been with the Bengals since 2019. So his record is 37-44-1. So 457 win percentage.
Yep.
But he does get his team to the big game. Like, they've been to the Super Bowl, they've been to AFC Championship games. And you could say, well, Joe Burrow's had season-ending injuries twice. And, that first year, who was our quarterback in 2019? Because that was the year leading up to Burrow.
I can't recall. I'm not sure.
So, I think he's better than his record shows, but I don't want to put much higher just because, well, at the end of the day, his win percentage still is .457, but I also don't want to knock him too much, realizing that he does have success when everyone's healthy.
19 would have still been Dalton. So.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So that would still been Dalton in there for the Bengals. I have him as well. I agree. Like he had a really good run. He's pretty decent in the playoffs, which is what you're looking for, but just has these regular season stretches, and especially without Joe Burrow, who would anybody be without the franchise quarterback? But it just doesn't seem like they can ever get it done. Although he went 3-1 with Jake Browning at times, through the first stretch. But Lou Anarumo is such a good defensive coordinator. But what are they going to do without Callahan, who's now an offensive coordinator, is now going to be a head coach from their offensive coordinator? He's that fiery presence. Will Burrow now take a step back coming off of that injury? Still getting ranked number 9, still pretty successful for what they've being another coach with a losing record. So that's still pretty impressive. Okay, as we go into 8 range now, this is where I have Dan Campbell. Another coach with a lose 29-33-1. Obviously had a really good season last year, taking his team to the NFC Championship game. So he's definitely gotten the most out of his team. But it's been short-lived, so it's always seemed to be around a 500 coach or worse, beside a good season last year. Can they keep it up this season? That's what I'm thinking around the Lions. But tell me about what you got going on at 8th.
Well, this is where I don't necessarily have him, but I think this is Sean McDermott territory, because I was going back and forth between Campbell and McDermott for 7 and 8, because I don't think McDermott is in that top 6. I definitely don't think he's top 5 yet. But I think that McDermott is somewhere within this range. So I guess I can start having the McDermott discussions now, because on one side, McDermott's done a lot of great things for the Bills. 4 straight division championships, the playoffs 6 out of 7 years, and he has a great win percentage. But what's the biggest knock? They cannot win the big game, and they've only been to 1 AFC Championship game, and essentially window 1 is closed now. They got rid of Stephon Diggs. They got rid of Jordan Poyer. We still don't know about Micah Hyde, Trey White, Mitch Morse. So this is a youth movement with the players and the coordinators now with Joe Brady and Bobby Babbage. So this is window number 2. And I think it's almost criminal that they only got to 1 AFC Championship game with that core of players. With Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and you only have 1 AFC Championship game to show for it. Not to mention 13 seconds. That is a big stain on his resume. So that's why I think, it's good to recognize all the good that McDermott has done. And that's why I think he is a top 10 head coach. And in this case, at least top 8. But I can't go much higher than 6 or 7 here, just based on what happens in January every single year.
So one of the bigger discussions I have isn't necessarily with anything you said. It's who are you putting in their top 5? Just not you personally, but anybody, just not to have McDermott there. So you're looking at Mike Tomlin. Obviously he's had a successful past, gets trounced in the playoffs now. Like it's kind of like a thing of the past. So we're gonna hear a little bit about Tomlin. Like, why is Matt LaFleur always considered better? Dan Campbell. Like, I understand, like, we have bias of Bills in a negative way here to where we rank him lower. But, like, that's who we're going against in terms of, like, other coaches in this league, where Steelers fans basically want Tomlin out of town at this point. I guess Campbell, with his losing record, I guess you can put above him. You have Kyle Shanahan's up there, obviously, as well. He's been successful. He's had his lapses in his career, almost as like a clone of McDermott on the offensive side of the ball in terms of their success rate, but at least they've gotten to a Super Bowl. You have John Harbaugh, obviously, up there. What has he done lately with this Ravens team? Then obviously, to me, we could keep going up the list. But why I have a struggle with why he isn't 5th is for the reason of like Mike Tomlin, Matt LaFleur, and Dan Campbell. So you would basically say all 3 of them are better than McDermott, right?
Yeah, but that's where I was getting caught up a little bit because I said maybe McDermott is better than Campbell. And that's why I figured we would discuss that at least, because I would see both sides to that. Because Dan Campbell, to your point, doesn't have a winning record. He's been with the Lions since 2021, and his record is 29, 33, and 1. Good enough for a 468 win percentage. But here's the thing. I think both of these guys are great in the locker room. They're great culture guys. They have great character. They're player coaches, right? All those accolades. But I think this is an interesting aspect to discuss is that Dan Campbell's ceiling is higher than McDermott's right now because of what I said. McDermott already had window 1 expire, and now he's working with window number 2. So Dan Campbell, what the Lions did last year, that was like the 2020 Bills, where it's like, oh, wow, we got this new shiny toy here. Everyone's favorite, the fan favorites here it was the Buffalo Bills. Now the Detroit Lions, they got to the championship game. Wow, let's see what Dan Campbell can do. And what did Sean McDermott do after 2020? 3 straight divisional losses. So I could look at that past experience and say, well, McDermott does have the resume. He has a win percentage. He has a division titles. And we have to see what Campbell can do first before we can put him higher than McDermott. But I could also see it on the other side and say, well, Dan Campbell has a higher ceiling than McDermott because he's still in that window number 1 phase.
But he's kind of bounced around though. So I guess he's in window number 1 phase of Detroit. I mean, is there really a window? They're on a Jared Goff style deal. Like they're paying now Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, I guess what would we consider window 1 for them? Just a certain amount of time? Or I guess when would that expire? Obviously, he had some experiences at Miami going 5-7 in 2015 as a head coach. Like, to me, I have to see Dan Campbell do more. Like, after he does something this year, I would then venture to say, like, I can put Dan Campbell now toward the top of my list. But I can't personally put him higher than 8. It's not just a McDermott thing. That's just where I see him because losing record, like, I'm glad he had 1 good season, but I need 2. Like, I can't have 1 good year. And I mean, he's made the playoffs 1 time.
Yeah, that's fine. So if you want to put Campbell at 8, and then I would put McDermott 7, but I can't put McDermott any higher than that. Like, until McDermott can win the big game, I'm not putting him in my top 5, even my top 6. So with that methodology here, I have Dan Campbell at 8, Sean McDermott at 7, and then I have Matt LaFleur at 6, because I think that he does have those regular season wins. He has those division titles, and he can get his team to the championship game and not a Super Bowl. They haven't gotten a Super Bowl with LaFleur yet. I was thinking Kyle Shanahan, but I just think that, he's worked with Aaron Rodgers and now Jordan Love, and it seems like the Packers are also on the incline here. And I think that their second window is like wide open here based on how last season finished for them. And I think that, obviously when you have Aaron Rodgers, it makes it a lot easier. But I think that LaFleur was able to do a lot of good things with the Rodgers-led team. And now it's like they didn't even miss a beat and there's no drop off. And it's like, oh, now we have the next QB in line here, the next QB in succession. And we're just going to run it back here with Jordan Love. And we're just going to get to our 3rd NFC championship game in the last, 6 years or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like the way mine would go would actually go for me personally. It would go Matt LaFleur 8. And I would put Dan Campbell 7. I thought Dan Campbell outcoached him. I thought that Aaron Rodgers was super uninspired in 2022. He's always struggled to find a defensive coordinator. One of the biggest things around LaFleur that I was reading was that he's bungled the 2021 NFC Championship game with some decisions himself. So I just struggle with what he's done that's any different than Sean McDermott. And then obviously now not even winning his division now with someone, Dan Campbell, who's, like you mentioned, is on the up and up, and it might be the shiny new toy there. Like, I personally have, the way mine would go, it'd be Campbell would be ahead of LaFleur. So that's how I would look at it. But in terms of our list, you have McDermott 7, and then obviously LaFleur 6, I'm guessing. Is that correct?
Yeah. And, Matt LaFleur, he's been with the Packers since 2019. His win percentage is 675, so a 56-27 record. And I believe he had 3 straight 13-win seasons to start his coaching career, correct?
I believe so.
Now, those were all with Rodgers, right?
Yes, they would have been.
Yeah, okay, because last year was the first year without Rodgers.
Yep, correct.
So, again, it makes it easier when you have Aaron Rodgers, but you could say the same thing about Josh Allen. So, I know I said I wouldn't put McDermott any higher, but this is like the last possible spot that I would put McDermott at 6. Like, I cannot put McDermott in the top 5 yet. So, I mean, like, if you want to agree that way and say it goes Campbell 8, LaFleur 7, McDermott 6, like that is the furthest
Sure.
I can't put McDermott.
Yeah, but also like do you have LaFleur above Campbell? So you would have LaFleur above Campbell?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, I have it reversed, but we can go with that. So Campbell 8, LaFleur 7, and then McDermott 6. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. So there we have it. So there's the slotting of the non-top 5 coaches, which would be, there's some interesting debate there. Like LaFleur's resume is very offensively very similar in terms of like what he's been able to do as a coach to like what Sean McDermott has. So they have a lot of similarities, like some decision problems. LaFleur has historically struggled at the defensive coordinator spot. So there's been definitely some discussions. They're an interesting debate. Really, they are. The difference is like the Jordan Love-led Packers versus Josh Allen-led Bills. We'll see how this turns out next year. But that's, I guess, for now, where we're going to slot it in for this season.
Now, before we move into the top 5, now we just made the case that Sean McDermott is going to be at number 6. But tell me why you think he could be in the top 5.
This is an interesting by spin. Reed, McVay, Sirianni are the only current head coaches that have won a Super Bowl. I could be missing a head coach who hasn't won recently.
Yeah, I haven't
There you
thought
go.
about that. No, wait. Tomlin.
Yeah, Tomlin's still active. And he's in the top 5. He has made it to the top 5 in our rankings. Sorry. So I think so why would I think McDermott would be in the top 5? So if you take it another level, right? So there's a couple of coaches that like, obviously we're probably going to agree to number 1, probably 2, probably 3, but then it gets interesting. I think one that you can discuss is Tomlin. Like how recently are we going to give him credit for? Like the team's been kind of a mess. They get a lot out of those 9-8 teams. They were a mess in the playoffs this year. Like there was a lot of talk about firing Tomlin, and we're still giving him top 5. I think we have a little bit of like history bias in there of like the Bill Belichick style of bias of where would we put like if Pete Carroll was still on the list. That's kind of how I look at it a little bit. Like I think we have a little bias of putting Mike Tomlin in the top 5. Like they want him fired. They legitimately want him fired there. They're going probably all in for the last time in Pittsburgh of like trying to make big changes that Pittsburgh doesn't generally make. And they just don't fire coaches there. Like they're kind of like the Yankees. They don't make a move. But they did go in with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, drafted Roman Wilson, really redid their offensive line. The defense is always pretty good, as we saw for most of the year, but they got kind of ripped apart in the playoffs. But he's my number 5, but I would have McDermott above Tomlin at this. He got outcoached by him pretty extensively. So we'd have to take a lot of his way past with Ben Roethlisberger, like many moons ago with Ben Roethlisberger, to really consider Tomlin in the top 5. That's how I look at it.
See, and Tomlin's in my top 5 because he has the experience, he has the Super Bowl, and he gets the most out of his players. Like, I don't understand how all these fans can say we need to fire Mike Tomlin when I think they should really be saying we need to find a quarterback, because the fact that this guy can still make the playoffs and have winning records when they're trotting out Mitch Trubisky. No offense to Mitch. I love Mitch, but he's a perfect backup quarterback, but he was the starting quarterback last year. Kenny Pickett, the reincarnated Mason Rudolph, noodle arm Ben Roethlisberger. He couldn't even throw his last year. And Tomlin still leads his team to the playoffs, not to mention all the success that he had earlier on in his career. So I don't understand why Steelers fans are so against him. And I really think that Pittsburgh is going to be a very tough out this year, because I think Russell Wilson is going to kind of reinvent himself. And I think that regardless, Tomlin is going to get his 9 wins. You add Russell Wilson, this could be an 11 or 12 win team. I know they have a very hard schedule, but I wouldn't count the Steelers out. And, Tomlin's career record, 173, 102. So he has a 633 win percentage, and he's been there since 2007. So I just think he has a little bit of everything between the experience, the accolades, even recently. I know they bottomed out, as recent as this past season. The Bills crushed them in the playoffs, but again, look at their quarterback situation, and they deal with a ton of injuries as well. So I think Mike Tomlin is a
Okay.
top 5 head coach.
Follow-up question on Tomlin. Why Tomlin over A, LaFleur, and B, McDermott?
I think for all the reasons that I just laid out, like he can get to the big game. Like we've seen that in the past. I know it's been a while, but I think the reason why he hasn't been able to get there recently is because of the quarterback situation. Like if Mike Tomlin had Josh Allen, I think that they could at least get to one, if not two more AFC championship games. So that's why I think McDermott isn't a top 5 head coach yet, because I need to see him take this team back to the AFC championship game. Like they can't just keep bottoming out in the divisional round. And we sit here and say, oh yeah, McDermott's a top 5 head coach. Everything's great. And we're building a new stadium. McDermott's going to be here forever. Like I'm thinking there could be an expiration date here. I know Terry Pegula probably doesn't want to fire McDermott, but if they continue to lose in the divisional round, his seat is going to be very, very warm.
Yeah, it's a tough debate. Second winningest coach in all of sports. Also, in terms of and also one of the biggest discussion points are one of the only teams beside the Chiefs to win playoff games in back-to-back years. There's definitely a lot of pros. Like he is the next up after the Super Bowl coaches. Like he is the next in line. So we have to hyper focus on like 13 seconds. Where how did we not get a message into the kicker? Does a squib kick change that game? We'll never know. We got some decisions in there that are challenging. And also having to be in an era, Josh Allen is in an era himself, but they're in an era with Andy Reid and Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes combo. So is there really, like, beside being perfect in every facet of the way, like, is there anything we could do? The Chiefs stumbled down last year to a point where, like, there was, like, weird scenarios where they wouldn't have won the division. It was a super weird stumble at the end of last year. Travis Kelce was looking like he was done. And then all of a sudden, like, Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. The Bills took advantage, in my opinion, in a really good first 3 quarters against the Chiefs. They played really well. Like everything was clicking to me. Like I even liked the aggressiveness of calling a fake punt when they weren't moving the ball. I thought that was a good call. Do I like the?
I kind of like that too, to be
Damar
honest.
Hamlin end around? Like the funny part was, you have Ty Johnson on your special teams unit. Why isn't he taking it? But like, I have an issue with the special teams coach. Like, I think he's terrible. So that's my own opinion. Like, if that's a play that's installed, obviously McDermott signs off on it, but that's a play that's installed by your special teams coordinator, Matthew Smiley. Why would it go to Hamlin to catch him off guard? The hole was actually there. That's the funny part. If you watch that play, for someone natural with the ball in their hand, the hole was there. Hamlin was just like gangling around and was surprised that people saw them fake it when he was jolting around in the backfield for like 5 seconds. Like, of course they noticed that. So like, but I like the aggressiveness there of Sean McDermott. I liked what they were able to do. Like Josh Allen got pushed into on a play by Deion Dawkins that literally was a right read, right play, right time, right touchdown. Obviously, they were in position to make a field goal to tie the game. Sure, we can all assume that Mahomes would have either won it then or in overtime. Like that's a super easy assumption to make, but like the Bills had just stopped them. We don't know with 100% confidence. Like you got to rely on your field goal kicker to make that field goal. Like that is not Sean McDermott's fault. Like he did everything possible. Like getting him in position. I thought he had a super good defensive stand the series before. Like defensively, they played pretty well in the fourth quarter. Offensively disappeared. Like that was super different than 13 seconds. So like for me, like I just don't knock McDermott for the last loss. Like it's different than 13 seconds where there's obviously a lot of criticism there. Like McDermott also did his best to coach with 0 linebackers. Like the one position that Andy Reid and Sean McDermott and Patrick Mahomes take advantage of on a defense is the linebacking position. And the Bills literally went out and signed like 10 guys that we've talked about on the show to correct that issue. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all translates this season. But I thought like the coaching job that they did after that hit piece that came out about all the different points of contention in the Bills locker room, and they were actually rallied and then continued to win out, stomped in the snow game, stomped the Steelers to where the Steelers were trendy. They were playing good defense. The Bills were not going to be able to get through that. Absolutely stomped them. They were just in position to not continue to get that one. The thing the Bills need to do is get the 1 seed. They need to have a year where they get that stupid 1 seed. They get a bye. And instead of losing Terrell Bernard, now Terrell Bernard and the entire team is resting. Gabe Davis is probably eligible to play. Like there's so many different components of all of this thing. But I just don't think we're even in any type of territory to where McDermott's on the hot seat. But also like I personally have him I'm fine with like agreeing to put him in 6 because until he makes the game, like I understand the argument that he could be 6, he could be 7, he could be 8. For me, it's more about the guys we've talked about not deserving it either. Besides some of the top guys, like there's a couple names that like, what have they done? So that's really where I struggle. Not that I think that McDermott's an infallible number 3 overall coach. It's just that like against his peers, he's been more successful. Like he's been more, and we could say it's Josh Allen, but he's been more successful. So that's why, you asked me a question earlier, why would he be in the top 5? Those would be the reasons for me where I would have him 4th overall as a 4th overall head coach. Regular season matters. Regular season success matters. It's a dart and it's a playoff lottery ticket. And one of these years, you're going to cash it in, and even against Patrick Mahomes. So that's kind of where I feel it. We need those lottery tickets. We need those top 3 seeds, and one of them is going to cash in one of these years. And that's why I'm feeling pretty good. And like, yeah, this is a great point by Spin to kind of cap this off. Any head coach has gone without a franchise. I agree with that. Like, I firmly agree with that notion that like, there's been some examples of like some decent coaching jobs without franchise quarterbacks, but like most of these guys are nothing without their franchise quarterback. They have to get credit for A, agreeing to draft this guy, B, helping develop him, C, putting him in position to win, D, always doing what's right by him defensively in the regular season when Josh is struggling, where Sean is holding his end of the bargain, missing 3 of his best defensive players. So we can't forget like the masterful job that Sean does at the end of every single season to put him in position to be the 1 or 2 seed. Like Kevin, they put him in position every year to win 3, 4. You said it earlier in our show in November or October. Like they win 6 in a row every year.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about McDermott before we finish off the top 5 here is I think he is definitely worthy of being in this range that we're talking about for all the reasons that you just laid out. Like they win every single year and they play their best football in December. And, even last year after that hit piece came out and then everyone thought like, oh man, like he's done for. Well, what'd they do? They ripped off 5 straight wins and they won the division week 18, like I predicted on the debut of our show here on Built in Buffalo. But, other things like putting his players in position to win, especially on defense, like getting AJ Klein out of his RV. And he was like the leading tackler against the Chiefs in the playoff game. He's undefeated.
Played well against the Steelers.
Yeah. And McDermott's still undefeated after the bye, right?
Yes. Yep.
So like they never lose following the bye. He's very good at self-correcting, and they usually don't make the same mistakes twice, but there comes to a finish line with that point because, as much as we say, oh, he's good at self-correcting, and if the Chiefs beat him 1 year, well, okay, cool. You can beat them the next year in the regular season, but can you beat them in the playoffs? And that's where I think McDermott is getting held up by a lot of people, myself included, for these rankings, because until he can win that big game and get the Bills over the hump and finally get past the Chiefs, then he can finally become a top 5 head coach. But until then, he's sitting on the outside looking in.
And good point here by Spin. Question is, how many would do better than McDermott with Allen? Probably not as many as people think. That's where my ranking list comes from, that exact line of thinking. Because here's one thing I hear of. Let's match him with Ben Johnson, a guy that obviously is behind Dan Campbell. Where the Bills upgrade. So you already have Josh Allen basically leading your offense with a nice mind and Brady. Where would they upgrade with an offensive head coach? Like, I guess everybody's looking for that Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes combo. Fine. But like, okay, so now the Bills go from where they've been DVOA or where they've been ranked on offense from 2 to 3 to 4, depending on what metric you want to use, to 2 to 1. I guess they get that marginal upgrade. Sure. little bit more consistency in the regular season on offense, there's possibility of that. But like, how much is a defense going to drop with that offensive? Like, the Chargers can't get out of their own way. We'll see if they're able to. Like, how much can that defense really decline? That's what would be a big nervous factor for me. So that's ultimately like kind of what I always go back to, like the Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Spagnuolo combo is like non-existent, and we may never see something like that again. We had the Brady and Belichick combo for a different factor, but that was more of like an offensive and defensive combo. So like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how much an offensive coach is going to drive Allen more than he already has. And with Brady, like, I guess that whole Dable combo is kind of interesting for people, but what's Dable doing right now without Josh Allen? So, he's not even in our top 15. So like, it's an interesting discussion with how much more could you get the top offensive mind right now. Ben Johnson seemed to bomb interviews, by the way. The top offensive mind, who's more than just writing up a game plan offensively. Look at what Mike McDaniel, one of the greatest offensive minds in the league is Mike McDaniel, just not successful when it matters. Like, his defense is always a problem. They have no defensive coordinators or swapping them out. Like, they don't get it done in the playoffs. They can't win away from home. It's an absolute mess in Miami, in my opinion, but he's a great he's an absolute mastermind offensively. That speed option, the motion, like absolutely stunning. What he's able to do with Tua. Absolutely. But that's my opinion on the offensive coordinator combo. But let's get into the top four, Kevin. We have Mike Tomlin locked in.
Yeah, go ahead. It might not be offense versus defense here in regards to coaching Josh Allen. Like, game management plays a big factor here, because that's one of the factors that is also holding Sean McDermott back, where we see him make those boneheaded calls late in games, late in quarters, before the half, right at the end of the quarter, at the end of the game, special teams, quintessentially 13 seconds. So I don't think it's necessarily, should we get an offensive-minded head coach or a defensive-minded head coach? I think it's just, can you get someone who is well-rounded offensively, defensively, and clock and game management?
I think even more so, to your point, that's even harder to find. We can find an offensive guy. They could probably find another defensive guy. Can they find somebody that can do those elite level things? Not many. I mean, Andy Reid prior to Kansas City was known to fail in those. He's been one of the worst game managers of all time prior to KC. Like, he struggled mightily. I remember specifically being at a game, Bills-Eagles, where Andy Reid calls a play before the end of the half, and running around, he's scrambling around, he's pressing the issue, and they throw the ball to the back of the end zone right before the end of the half. I think it was with Mike Vick. And Andy Reid sitting on the sideline holding up 1 second because he knew he called a bad play. Like, those are the kind of boneheaded mistakes that you saw from Andy Reid. Like, so I think that the only way to do that is to continue to be a head coach in this league. And I think Sean's starting to overcome some of it. Like, calling a fake punt in the playoffs is not a bad decision. You didn't have a defense. You had the ghosts of your defensive backs passed. You had no linebackers, and now Mahomes is going to get the ball back. And you had a great stand at the goal line by Jordan Poyer knocking the ball out right after that. And then another good defensive stand to give the ball back in that scenario as well in the fourth quarter. But like where they had to stop him twice, where they called that BS, I think a holding. They gave him another first down at the 50 that pretty much should have sealed the game, but the Bills defense held again. So really they stopped him multiple times in the fourth quarter. And like, to me, I thought his game was fine. I thought he coached a pretty solid football game against shorthanded. But I agree with you, man. Like, some of those coaching decisions need to change. But I think like he's learning on some of that front. And I'm excited. And the team was totally different with a Brady-led offense. They started winning football games, started running the ball. We've talked about that philosophy on the show many, many times. But yeah, I agree. Like, ultimately, you are looking for a coach, a leader of the team, and game management, but like, that is something that no one can get until 10, 15, 20 years in the league. That is why people prefer some of these vet coaches. Like, they're just continue to be hired every single coaching cycle. Like, Mike McCarthy will always be hired, and Raheem Morris and some of these guys who have done it before. And that's why they get the hire over some hot young gun who is the best offensive coordinator in the league. Ben Johnson couldn't get out of his own way in the interview process. So exactly to your point, I don't think people thought Ben Johnson could coach, to your point, like in these big situations with game management and having to do more than just call an offensive play. So I totally agree with you, but let's get into the top four now. So left on the list, we have Kyle Shanahan. We have obviously Andy Reid. we have Sean McVay and John Harbaugh. What is your opinion on how you would rank those top 4?
So Tomlin's locked in at 5 then?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say I'd probably put Harbaugh right, I guess in this case it would be right after Tomlin. So Harbaugh 4, Tomlin 5 because of the accolades, what he's done in the past, and recency bias. They just went to the AFC Championship game, and Mike Tomlin has been that 9-8 mediocre coach for the last few years. So I think Harbaugh gets a nod above Tomlin. So then that leaves Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, and Sean McVay. Honestly, you want to just lock in Andy Reid as number 1 right now? Like,
yeah, there's not much to talk about right now. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So then it's between Shanahan and McVay for 2 and 3, right?
Yes, that would be left. So how do you see that going?
I would say probably Shanahan 2, McVay 3, just because he's gotten to the Super Bowl. Shanahan, that is. They've gone to the NFC Championship game multiple times, and McVay has had a couple of down years, but for the most part, he's been pretty good. But yeah, I think I would go Shanahan first.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised. Like overall record, 64-51 from Kyle Shanahan. And he's just an offensive EPA machine. Like you see some of those crazy decisions, and his offenses are ridiculous. But they continue to lose the biggest games of the year. And McVay has won it, I think. And McVay has a better regular season still. He's swapped quarterbacks. Went with Stafford, an older guy, and got rid of Goff. I thought his coaching job last year was super good. Like, so for me, like, I just like McVay more, and I think he just hits it on the head. Like, I think McVay's my quintessential number 2 coach in this league. Like, that's just where he's going to sit, even when they have down years and no quarterbacks. Like, he still got it done semi-recently with the Von Miller year. Yes, it wasn't in the last 2 years, but he's been able to get it done and still wins when he shouldn't have won. You have Aaron Donald retiring. It could be a difficult campaign, but I want to see what he's able to do with that in terms of what's going on. But analytically, and you asked about like the coaching style, like he is always making the right decisions. And the run they made last year was pretty impressive. Like I didn't think that roster was very good. But what he's able to do with Puka Nacua, like, I don't know. I just have a hard time. I know the recency may and the EPA and they put Shanahan there. I got to go McVay 2, but Shanahan 3, but like it's negligible.
Yeah, I mean, I could go with that. You could also make the point for Shanahan that he got to the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy. If you want, I like Brock Purdy. I think he's a tick above Garoppolo, but these guys aren't elite talents by any means. Like, we're not talking about a Josh Allen here. And Shanahan had Josh Allen. Like, I think he is definitely going to the Super Bowl. He's definitely the second best coach in the league. And it's a little bit of a different story. So, I mean, I could see it both ways. But if you want to put McVay at number 2, Shanahan 3, I could see that, because you could also say Shanahan can't win the big game. And like you said, McVay has.
I got to. Like, ultimately, we've kind of referenced the big game for McDermott. We've referenced it with a couple other coaches, LaFleur. Like, ultimately, McVay's done it, and he's done it semi-recently beside Reid and Belichick. Like, he's like the only other guy that's got one, right? Like, who am I missing that has gotten one? Right? Is there anyone up there like Doug Peterson? Like, who else? Who else has a Super Bowl win? Like Doug Peterson.
Yeah, what was that comment that we had? Because there's more than 3, right?
Yeah, someone said there was only 3, but they said, I think it was spin, but it was actually Peterson that's won it, not Sirianni hadn't won. He lost it. So Harbaugh's 5. Harbaugh, Tomlin, Peterson, McVay, Reid. Yeah, okay, that's right.
Is that correct. It? Just those 5?
Yeah.
Oh, Sean Payton.
Yeah, Peyton. Yeah, Peyton should be on there too.
So 6, and then maybe there's one that because all the other guys are new.
No, there's not.
Todd Bowles? Yeah. Did he, or was he defensive coordinator?
He was defensive coordinator.
Okay.
For
Tampa.
Yeah, Arians.
That's right. Okay. So that's 6 active head coaches with the Super Bowl.
Yep. So,
and someone said Sirianni too, right? But he
no, Arians.
He didn't. No, well, there was this one, but someone said Sirianni earlier, but he didn't win one.
Yeah, no, it's not Sirianni. Sirianni has not. He's lost his only appearance.
Yeah.
But yeah, Arians is the coach that has, and obviously he's done too. So like, I got to put McVay to wrap this up. I got to pick McVay too because of the win. They made it the same amount of Super Bowls as each other, and he's got the win, right? So ultimately, I think that matters for me. And I think they're just as good of offensive minds too. Like
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, like let's talk about just a regular season, even like what he's able to do. So this is a big make or break year for both of those. I mean, McVay's already done it, but it's pretty big for Shanahan. Like he's got to prove that he can continue to move the needle, and they need to get over the hump. They've got to they're one leg above the Bills. They've got to the Super Bowl, but one could argue because the NFC's weaker though, Kevin. Like what if they flip? What if the 49ers and Bills flipped conferences? Would that be different? Would Mahomes have outdueled Shanahan? I think so. So as he, just most recently, has been able to do. So that's what I got for you, man. I think we should lock in McVay too. But I'm fine either. Like it's not like a huge deal either way.
Yeah, that's fine. So just to wrap this up, so we have Andy Reid number 1, Sean McVay number 2, Kyle Shanahan number 3, John Harbaugh number 4, Mike Tomlin rounding out the top 5.
Yep.
And then Sean McDermott 6, Matt LaFleur 7, Dan Campbell 8, correct?
Yep.
Zach Taylor 9, and then Kevin Stefanski rounding out the top 10. And then Nick Sirianni 11, Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins at 12, Kevin O'Connell with the Vikings at 13, and then we did McCarthy Payton, right?
Yes.
So Mike McCarthy 14, Sean Payton 15, and if you want the honorable mention, Doug Peterson at 16.
Yep, and then D'Amico Ryan's at 17. That's kind of how we rounded out the top 17. And big year for Ryan's. Like, can he get in that? He can catapult himself all the way up to that like Stefanski range into the top 10 with another campaign with that loaded roster. But if they don't get it done with that loaded roster, he's staying 17 for a while. I mean, that's where they're going to stay. So it's going to be a fun year to reflect back on this at the end of the year. Maybe we'll pull up some clips to see how we did at the end of next year, maybe for a segment. If it's fun, like maybe we'll have some time before the playoffs next year or something to pull this up. And maybe we'll reflect on it this time next June, to kind of go through kind of where our rankings were this year. And maybe we'll make a chart with the arrow up and arrow down for next year as well as we dive in. But I think top 15 is a pretty good range to do it. But I think next week's going to be fun too. Maybe we'll have a special guest before we get into the quarterback. There's already been discussions about the quarterback rankings. That should be another fun one of talking about where the quarterbacks are going to rank. I'm looking forward to that one because there's going to be some hot topic in that one. And I think I'm pretty steadfast in my top 10 with that too.
Next week, you want to do quarterbacks next week?
Yeah, we can dive into quarterbacks next week because why not?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, we'll also be doing like the rooms, like how does a Bills wide receiver room go up against other wide receiver rooms in the league? But head coach and quarterbacks are like individuals here that pertain to the Bills because obviously with McDermott and Allen. So we might as well get those two out of the way first. And then with the remaining weeks, we can talk about the different rooms across the league. Yeah,
I think the Bills receiver room as compared to its peers, it'll be fun to kind of see like, where are they at? Like we talk about these guys all the time, but how do they actually, like we just did with McDermott, how do they actually compare to their peers? So that will be fun. McDermott has to the new stadium. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. I could see that.
Me too.
I could see that. I could see that being longer based on his success, or I could see it not making it there. If they have some, year or two struggling here, but with the buy-in from the ownership, their new stadium, they don't want to be finding a coach. They don't want that coach to feud with the quarterback. We'll get into that in more of the quarterback discussion on the new stadium and the coach and the owner as it all pertains together. So that'll be a good topic for as we discuss it next week with some of the things and more. But it's going to be fun. How long does Sean McDermott have left? In everybody's mind is a little bit different. Some say just this year. Some say the new stadium. Some say until they suck. So there's going to be some good discussion to kind of monitor. And that will always be a discussion here on the Going Deep Buffalo podcast all offseason as we get into training camp. We're going to have some great training camp coverage. We'll be there a couple days. At least I will. Maybe Kevin will be able to make it out. And it will be a great, fantastic time as we almost approach middle of July. This training camp schedule's out, Kevin. So a lot to look forward to. Smash that like button. We appreciate everybody tuning in for an hour and 5 minutes. The Summit Center, Dave Dengler, and Larson-Timko Funeral Home. Really appreciate who our show sponsors. Leave us with some final thoughts for today, Kevin.
How's Garrett Cole doing?
He did okay.
Making his return.
He had a good pitching day. Ron Marinaccio went in there, it looks like, and messed it all up. But
okay.
but Garrett Cole did seem to get through it and had a good day for anybody watching baseball, for all the baseball fans out there. But looking forward,
Judge's X-rays came back negative. Thank God. Because I'm
Yes.
going to Toronto next weekend for my birthday. It worked perfectly where the Yankees are in Toronto, and as of now, Aaron Judge will be playing. So thank you.
Yes, there you go. You got lucky with that one. And yes, Ben, we really appreciate it. Regular season shows will be 2 hours starting back in July. We'll be hitting up those 2 hour shows, maybe from training camp. But during the ranking season and the off season, we want to keep it short, sweet, deliver some punching content. So we're not really beating a dead horse with our rankings list. Like we could have gone and really beat it up McDermott a little bit more. But like I thought we got a really good segment in like what we thought how this top 15 went. But really appreciate everybody tuning in, and to all the Bills content. We'll see how right we are with the Bills and Sean McDermott landing at number 6 with a kind of a compromise between Kevin and I. So we'll kind of see how, is he going to be more in that 10 to 12 range, or is he going to finally catapult himself back into the top 5 with a well done season? That roster is really intriguing, Kevin. So we'll get into that and more in our July shows. But go Bills, and thank you everybody else. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll catch you all here next week, talking quarterbacks, talking Josh Allen, and we'll break down our rankings list then.